It was my daughter Nicole's 42nd birthday, and I arrived at her house early carrying a custom cake from the bakery she had loved since childhood. I stood at the front door smiling, expecting the same excitement Nicole used to have whenever I surprised her with something special. But the second she opened the door, that feeling disappeared. "Oh, it's you," she muttered flatly, barely looking at me. She didn't even glance at the cake in my hands. The candles shifted slightly as I tightened my grip on the box. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said softly, lifting the cake toward her. "Chocolate and strawberries. Your favorite." Nicole sighed as if my presence had already exhausted her. "Mom, we need to talk." She let me inside without even thanking me for the cake. Nicole folded her hands together. Once we sat down in the living room. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she said carefully. "About birthdays. About gifts. About what would actually make me happy." Relief washed through me for a moment, and I smiled immediately. "Then tell me," I said. "Anything you want. A trip, jewelry, maybe that SUV you mentioned." She looked directly at me then, and something in her eyes made my stomach tighten. There was no warmth there, only resentment. "The one thing I'd really love for my birthday," she said slowly, "is for you to just die." Everything around me went silent. I felt the air leave my lungs while her words repeated inside my head. "My name is Gloria Patterson." I was 69 years old, and until that moment, I truly believed there was nothing I would sacrifice for my daughter. If you've ever done everything for someone you loved only to feel invisible in return, stay with me, because what happened after that moment changed the rest of my life. And before we continue, tell me where you were listening from tonight. We were sitting in the beautiful house I had helped pay for years earlier, when she and Brian got married. Over time, I had poured nearly $500,000 into that home through down payments, mortgage help, and emergencies. Money earned after decades of double shifts at Anne's medical center. My daughter, my own daughter, wishing for my death like it was a burden finally being removed from her life. "What?" I whispered. "Nicole, what did you just say?" "You heard me." Her voice stayed terrifyingly calm. "I'm tired of you, Mom. The constant calls. The random visits. You always showing up. My life would honestly be easier if you disappeared." My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the cake box. 69 years old. 42 years of motherhood. And never once had I imagined hearing those words from my daughter. "Nicole," I said through tears. "I gave you everything. I sacrificed my whole life for you." "Exactly," she snapped, standing up. "That's the problem." She crossed her arms tightly. "You suffocate people. You always need to feel needed. I need space. I need a life that revolve around your emotional dependence." The candles on the cake had already started melting. Everything I imagined for that evening family dinner, laughter, pictures with Ethan and Lily collapsed right there in front of me. "But sweetheart," I tried again quietly, "I just wanted to feel close to you. You're my family. And I don't want to be your entire world anymore." She replied instantly. "Go live your own life." I slowly stood up, my legs weak beneath me. The cake suddenly felt humiliated in my hands. "I can't believe you talking to me like this," I murmured. "After everything I've done for you." Nicole laughed under her breath. "You didn't do those things for me, Mom. You did them because you liked feeling important. But I'm not a child anymore." The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Because she truly believed them. I walked toward the door feeling older with every step. Right before leaving, I turned back one last time, hoping to see guilt or regret on her face. Instead, all I saw was impatience. She wanted me gone so her real birthday celebration could finally begin. "Happy birthday, Nicole," I whispered. Then I walked out and quietly closed the door behind me. At the time, I didn't realize it would be the last moment I ever stepped into that house, as the woman who had spent her entire life sacrificing herself for her daughter. Because something inside me cracked open that night. Something that had been buried for decades. I drove back to my apartment with tears, blurring the road ahead of me. The cake ended up in the trash. The melted candles looked like little streams of wax, crying down the sides. I sat alone on the old couch, where I had once rocked Nicole to sleep as a baby, read her bedtime stories, and cried happy tears the first time she called me mommy. And all I could think was, how did we end up here? How does a daughter become so cold toward the person who built her entire life? That night, memories kept flooding back. When Nicole was 3 and nearly died from pneumonia, I worked endless overtime shifts to pay for medication insurance refused to cover, nearly $5,000. I even sold my mother's jewelry. When she turned 16 and begged for a designer prom dress, I spent months working weekends to buy it. More than $2,000 for one night. "You're the best mom in the world," she had said while hugging me tightly. In college, when she kept changing majors and panicking over tuition, I covered every semester without complaint. $118,000 altogether. I refinanced my home to make it happen. Then came the wedding. $82,000 for the perfect venue, flowers, dress, and photographs. "I want my princess to have everything," I used to say proudly while signing check after check. And then came the house. That same house where she had just looked me in the eye and wished me dead. When Nicole and Brian decided to buy their first home, I handed over $480,000 for the down payment without hesitation. Retirement money I had spent decades saving. When Ethan and Lily were born, I became the permanent babysitter. Every dinner date, every weekend trip, every emergency call, I was always there. And when Brian lost his job the year before, I covered nearly 8 months of mortgage payments myself. $46,000 straight from my retirement income. There were weeks I survived on canned soup just to keep them comfortable. Then came school fees, dental work, gifts, emergencies. More checks, more sacrifices. I eventually walked over to my desk and pulled out the boxes filled with receipts, transfers, mortgage paperwork, insurance payments, and years of financial records. Not because I distrusted Nicole, because I had once been proud of everything I had done for her. I sat there for hours adding up the numbers. Raising Nicole, college, the house, the mortgage, the childcare, the emergencies. The total made me physically sick. Nearly $1.9 million spent building my daughter's life. And in return, the one thing she wanted for her birthday was for me to die. Tears kept falling onto the paperwork as I stared at the final number sitting in front of me. Nearly $1.9 million. That was what a lifetime of loving my daughter had cost me. And somehow, after all of it, the one thing Nicole wanted most for her birthday was for me to disappear. I leaned back against the couch and closed my eyes, exhausted. If I had invested even half of that money, instead of pouring it into Nicole and Brian's life, my retirement would have looked completely different. I could have been traveling years ago, living comfortably, sleeping peacefully instead of sitting alone in a cramped apartment worrying about grocery bills. But I had believed in love. I truly believed sacrifice meant something. I thought one day, my daughter would look at me with kindness and say, "You've done enough, Mom. Let me take care of you now." Instead, she wanted distance from me so badly that death sounded easier to her than love. I picked up my phone and called Nicole one last time, because part of me still hoped there had been some misunderstanding. She answered after several rings. "What do you want now, Mom?" The irritation in her voice hit me immediately. "Nicole," I said quietly, "did you really mean what you said earlier?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "I meant every word." I felt my chest tighten. "Mom, you need to understand something. This relationship isn't healthy anymore. You're obsessed with me. Obsessed, I repeated softly. You call a mother's love obsession? Yes, she said coldly. You're constantly calling, showing up, inserting yourself into my life. I need boundaries. I need space. You need to stop depending on me emotionally. I closed my eyes for a second. Not because I was confused anymore. Because I finally understood. There was no misunderstanding left to fix. My daughter truly believed my love was a burden. I ended the call without saying goodbye. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory I had of Nicole growing up. Every hug. Every school recital. Every time she ran into my arms, crying after getting hurt. Had she always seen me this way? Or had I spent so many years giving her everything that she stopped seeing me as a person at all? Sometime around 3 in the morning, something inside me shifted. The sadness was still there, but underneath it, something colder began to form. Clarity. For the first time in years, I stopped asking myself how to save the relationship and started asking why. I had spent so long sacrificing myself for someone who no longer valued me. Nicole wanted me out of her life. Fine. I would give her exactly what she asked for. Just not in the way she expected. The next morning, I woke up calmer than I had in years. Not happier, not healed, but focused. I dressed carefully, put on my best coat, and left my apartment with a plan already forming in my mind. My first stop was Summit Federal Bank, where Nicole and I shared an emergency account tied to the house. Over the years, I had deposited $75,000 into it for repairs, unexpected bills, and anything the family might need. Good morning, Mrs. Patterson. Daniel Brooks greeted me warmly. He had known me for years. How can I help you today? I'd like to close the joint account, I said calmly. His expression shifted in surprise. Are you certain? The balance is still substantial. I'm completely certain. I signed the paperwork with a steady hand and watched the money transfer back into my personal account. For the first time in a very long time, I felt something close to control returning to my life. And I was only getting started. That frightened me more than the heartbreak itself. My second stop was Harbor Financial Lending. The year before, when Brian lost his job, I had co-signed part of their mortgage, refinanced to keep them from losing the house. At the time, I thought I was protecting my daughter. Now I wanted to understand exactly what legal rights that decision had given me. Karen Whitmore, the mortgage officer, greeted me professionally before pulling up the file. I need copies of every document connected to the mortgage, I explained, especially anything involving my rights as co-signer. As she searched for the paperwork, I remembered the day Nicole cried in my arms after I agreed to help them. You saved us, Mom, she had whispered through tears. At the time, I believed her. Karen eventually placed a thick folder in front of me. As co-signer, she explained, you're financially responsible if the primary borrowers default. But because you covered previous payments yourself, you also have legal standing to pursue protective action if instability continues. I looked carefully through the paperwork, and would 8 months of missed payments covered by me qualify as instability? Karen nodded slowly. Yes. Combined with another recent employment loss? Absolutely. Brian had lost his job again the week before. Nicole mentioned it casually during one of her complaints about money, never realizing what that information could mean legally. She thought she was indirectly asking me for help again. Instead, she had handed me leverage. I left Harbor Financial Lending carrying copies of every document and a calmness I hadn't felt in years. Nicole had no idea how quickly the balance of power was beginning to change. My final stop that afternoon was Richard Calloway's office. Richard had been my lawyer for decades, and one of the few people who truly understood how much of my life I had sacrificed for Nicole. Gloria, he said warmly when I walked in. "This is a surprise. I need your help," I told him quietly as I sat across from his desk. "I want to change everything." His expression immediately sharpened. "What happened?" And for the first time, I told someone the truth. Every cruel word Nicole had said. The contempt in her voice. The way she looked at me when she told me the greatest gift I could give her was my death. Richard listened without interrupting once. By the end, his face looked heavier than before. I'm sorry, Gloria," he said quietly. "After everything you've done for her, I never imagined Nicole was capable of that." "Neither did I." I took a slow breath. "But I am done pretending this relationship is healthy." I told him I wanted to rewrite my will completely. Everything previously designated for Nicole would instead go to the Silver Hope Foundation, where I had volunteered for years. I also wanted protected trust funds established for Ethan and Lily, inaccessible until they turned 25. Richard nodded while taking notes. "And your life insurance? Change every beneficiary connected to Nicole." My voice stayed calm. "My daughter wants me dead. But when that day finally comes, she won profit from it." For nearly 2 hours we reviewed every legal document tied to my life. My apartment. My savings. My investments. My insurance policies worth nearly $750,000. Every piece of the future Nicole assumed belonged to her was quietly being removed. Then, just before leaving, I looked Richard directly in the eye. "There's one more thing," I said. "I want to begin preparing the paperwork to reclaim the house Nicole lives in. As co-signer on the mortgage, I still have rights," I told Richard quietly. "And Brian just lost his job again." A look of understanding crossed his face immediately. "Now I understand where this is heading," he said carefully. "Are you sure you want to take it this far?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation. My voice sounded calmer than I expected. "Nicole told me her life would be easier if I disappeared. I'm going to disappear, but before I do, I want her to understand exactly what life looks like without me and without everything I spent decades doing for her." When I left Richard's office, it was already dark outside. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel emotionally exhausted walking home. I felt awake. For most of my life, everything had revolved around Nicole. Her needs. Her emergencies. Her happiness. I had spent decades shrinking my own life to make hers easier. And suddenly, for the first time, I stopped asking myself what my daughter needed from me. I went back to my apartment, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat quietly by the window. I honestly couldn't remember the last time I had done something as simple as sitting alone and enjoying my own evening, without guilt attached to it. Then I picked up my phone and called a number I had saved months earlier, but never had the courage to use. Northbridge Relocation Services. The company specialized in helping retirees move overseas. "Good evening," I said when someone answered. "My name is Gloria Patterson. I'd like information about relocating to Scotland." The representative immediately sounded welcoming. "Edinburgh is very popular with our retirement clients," he explained. "We offer both temporary and long-term residency support." "What exactly are you looking for?" "Everything," I replied. I stared out at the city lights outside my apartment window. "I want to know what it would take for a 69-year-old woman to start over completely." After the call ended, I stood there for a long time thinking about how strange life could be. For decades, I had built my entire identity around being needed. Now I was quietly planning a life where no one could use me anymore. Nicole had asked me to disappear, and I was finally beginning to understand that disappearing might actually save me. The next several days became a strange mixture of grief, determination, and secret preparation. Every morning I woke up hurting, but I also woke up moving forward. By Wednesday morning, my phone rang. "Nicole." For a brief second, my heart lifted. Some small part of me still hoped she might apologize. Instead, the first thing she said was, "Mom, I need a favor." No hello, no apology, nothing. "What do you need?" I asked calmly. "The kids have a presentation Friday night, and Brian and I have a work dinner. Can you watch Ethan and Lily?" I almost laughed at the irony. The same daughter who had wished for my death only days earlier was still expecting unlimited access to my time, my energy, my life. "I can tea," I said simply. There was a pause. "What do you mean you can tea?" The genuine shock in her voice told me exactly how rarely I had ever said no to her before. "I have plans." "What plans?" she asked immediately, her tone already sharpening. "What could you possibly be doing?" The condescension in her voice hurt more than I wanted to admit, as if being 69 meant I no longer had the right to a life of my own. "Plans that don't involve babysitting," I replied calmly. "You'll need to find someone else." "Mom, it's last minute," she snapped. "And since when do you suddenly refuse to help with your own grandchildren?" There it was. The guilt, the manipulation, the expectation that my entire existence should remain permanently available to her. But this time, I didn't bend. "You told me your greatest birthday wish was for me to disappear," I said quietly. "I'm simply respecting your request." Silence filled the line. Then Nicole laughed softly, almost mockingly. "Oh my God. You're seriously dragging this out? This isn't tea drama, Nicole." "Then what is it?" "It's me finally listening to you." Her tone immediately hardened. "Fine. If you want to act childish, go ahead. But don't complain later when you're lonely." Then she hung up. No goodbye. No hesitation. I lowered the phone slowly and realized something surprising. The conversation hadn't devastated me this time. It had confirmed everything. That afternoon, I returned to Summit Federal Bank and transferred $120,000 into accounts, prepared for my relocation plans and the new life waiting for me in Scotland. For the first time in years, that money wasn't meant for Nicole. It was meant for my freedom. Afterward, I called Northbridge again and finalized my flight to Edinburgh for the following Tuesday, with an open-ended stay arrangement. The relocation setup alone cost nearly $18,000. For the first time in years, I spent money on myself without guilt. Thursday morning brought an unexpected knock at my door. It was Margaret Ellis, my neighbor from the apartment next door. Margaret was 67, sharp-minded, observant, and one of the few people who had quietly witnessed what my relationship with Nicole had become over the years. "Gloria," she said gently as we sat down with coffee, "you seem different lately. What's going on?" Margaret had seen everything. The canceled dinners whenever Nicole called, the grocery bags I carried to Nicole's house while living off canned soup myself, the exhaustion I constantly tried to hide. So this time, I told someone the truth. Everything Nicole had said, every cruel word, every plan I had quietly started putting into motion afterward. Margaret looked horrified. "My God, Gloria," she whispered. "After everything you've done for her." "The worst part," I said quietly, "is that she said it like it was completely reasonable. Like I was just some inconvenience she needed removed from her life." "And you're really leaving for Scotland?" "Yes," I nodded firmly. "My ticket is already booked." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You have my full support," she said. "What Nicole did to you was unforgivable." I hesitated for a moment before lowering my voice. "There's something I need help with." Then I explained the rest of the plan. How I wanted Nicole to believe I had truly vanished for a while. How Margaret would eventually discover the empty apartment. And the letter I planned to leave behind. Instead of looking shocked, Margaret slowly smiled. "You know what?" she said quietly. "Maybe this is exactly what Nicole needs." That night, I sat at my kitchen table, writing the hardest letter of my life. I rewrote it over and over, trying to make every sentence honest without sounding cruel. Finally, sometime after midnight, I began with the only words that felt true. My dear Nicole, you asked me for one thing on your birthday. You asked me to disappear from your life. So I finally decided to give you exactly what you wanted. By the time you read this letter, I will already be gone, beginning the life I should have chosen for myself years ago. Instead of sacrificing all of it trying to hold yours together, I spent most of that night finishing the letter I planned to leave behind for Nicole. Not a hateful letter. Not even an angry one. I wanted it to be honest. Page after page, I documented everything I had spent decades giving her. The money. The sacrifices. The opportunities I turned down because I was always available whenever Nicole needed something. But more than anything, I wanted her to finally understand what my presence in her life had actually been worth. Along with the letter, I included copies of every legal change I had made that week. The rewritten will, the cancellation of the insurance policies, and financial support connected to her. The notice regarding the mortgage rights I intended to exercise because of Brian's financial instability. Every safety net she had quietly depended on was disappearing at the same time I was. By the time I finished, the letter was 23 pages long, detailed, precise, impossible to misunderstand. Near the end, I wrote one final sentence that felt painfully true. Your life may become easier without me in it, but it will also become far more expensive. I hope it's worth it. Friday night, while packing the last of my belongings into 2 large suitcases, my phone lit up with Nicole's name. I didn't answer. She called 3 more times. I let every call ring out in silence. There was nothing left to say. The following afternoon, Brian showed up unexpectedly at my apartment. He looked exhausted, nervous. Gloria, he said carefully when I opened the door. Nicole told me what happened. I stayed quiet. I know what she said was terrible, he continued, but please don't do this to our family. Do what exactly? I asked calmly. Pull away like this. Stop helping us. The kids need you. Interesting. Only days earlier, I had been treated like an unwanted burden. Now suddenly I was essential again. Brian, I said quietly, your wife made herself very clear. My presence in her life is something she no longer wants. She didn't mean it like that. She wished for my death as a birthday gift. The words landed heavily between us. Brian lowered his eyes, because there was no defense for that. Please, he said softly. Just give me time to fix this. I will talk to her. I slowly shook my head. It's too late for that. Then, before closing the door, I added gently, give Ethan and Lily a hug for me. Sunday became my goodbye to the life I had spent decades building around everyone else. I walked through the city quietly by myself that morning. Past Annis Medical Center, where I had worked for most of my adult life. Past the park where I used to take Nicole when she was little. Past the church where I married her father all those years ago. Every place carried memories of a version of me that had always existed for someone else's needs. But by Monday morning, that life would finally end. And for the first time, I would begin living one of my own. That night I barely slept. Not because I was afraid, and not because I regretted leaving. It was something stranger than that. Anticipation. At 69 years old, I was about to step into a completely different life. At 5 o'clock Monday morning, Margaret Ellis knocked softly on my apartment door exactly as planned. She arrived carrying fresh coffee and the same knowing smile she had worn all week. Ready for your great escape? She asked. More than ready. My 2 suitcases were already waiting by the door. Margaret held up the spare keys I had given her the night before. And I still have the letter and legal documents for Nicole, she reminded me. We had carefully planned everything. Margaret would wait 2 days before contacting Nicole. She would pretend she became concerned after I stopped answering calls, and eventually used the spare keys to check on me. The empty apartment, the letter waiting on the table, the quiet disappearance. That would be how Nicole learned I was gone. "Remember," I told Margaret, while we waited for the cab downstairs. "You have to sound genuinely worried." Margaret laughed softly. "Gloria, I spent 30 years teaching drama students. I can manage worried." The cab arrived just after 6. As the driver loaded my luggage, I stood there looking at the apartment where I had lived for 15 years. Surprisingly, I didn't feel sadness. If anything, I felt relief, like I was finally walking out of a life that had slowly consumed me. "The airport?" the driver asked. "Yes," I replied quietly. And somehow those 2 words felt like the beginning of an entirely different existence. During the drive, I kept thinking about everything I was leaving behind. The routines, the constant anxiety, the endless responsibility of managing Nicole's emotional and financial crisis. But I also thought about what waited ahead of me. Freedom. The ability to make decisions without guilt. The ability to spend money on myself without mentally calculating what Nicole might need later. At the airport, Nicole called 3 times. I ignored every call. Then came a text message. "Mom, this is getting ridiculous. The kids are asking about you. Call me." I deleted it without replying. It amazed me how quickly my absence had become inconvenient for her. The flight to Edinburgh was long but peaceful. For the first time in decades, nobody knew where I was. Nobody could demand anything from me. Nobody expected immediate access to my time, money, or emotional energy. The freedom felt almost unreal. During the flight, I wrote for hours in my journal about everything that had happened during the previous week. Every painful conversation, every decision that had led me there. I wanted to remember exactly what it felt like to finally step away from a toxic relationship, even when that relationship was with my own child. I arrived in Edinburgh Tuesday evening local time. A representative from Northbridge Relocation Services was waiting for me near baggage claim holding a sign with my name on it. He introduced himself as Lucas Steiner, a friendly young man with an easy smile. "Mrs. Patterson," he said warmly, "welcome to Scotland. I hope you're ready for a new chapter." For the first time in a very long time, I replied honestly, "I think I am." Luca drove me to a furnished apartment in central Edinburgh that Northbridge had arranged for my first month. It wasn't extravagant, but it was peaceful. The apartment overlooked a quiet park, and from the windows I could see part of the city glowing under the evening lights. Luca handed me a folder filled with information. Restaurants, community groups, Scottish culture classes, art workshops, social programs for retirees. He had even arranged a meeting with a financial advisor the following afternoon in case I decided to stay permanently. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in years. No phone calls, no demands, no emergencies waiting for me in the morning. Only silence. And for the first time, silence felt comforting instead of lonely. Wednesday morning, I woke up early and walked through the city by myself. I had breakfast at a small cafe overlooking the street. I bought fresh flowers for the apartment. And later that afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I bought myself something unnecessary. A beautiful silk scarf that cost nearly $1,200. Not because anyone needed it. Not because it solved a problem. Simply because I liked it. And as I walked through Edinburgh afterward, I realized how much money and energy I had spent over the years, constantly rescuing Nicole and Brian from one problem after another. The mortgage, the gifts, the childcare, the emergencies. At least $50,000 in just the last few years alone. Money that could have gone toward building a life for myself, instead of constantly repairing theirs. For years, I had poured my time, money, and energy into Nicole's life, believing love would eventually come back to me as respect. Instead, I had become something she merely tolerated, an inconvenience she wanted removed from her life. Around 2 that afternoon in Edinburgh, I realized it would be early morning back home. Margaret was probably on her way to Nicole's house with the letter and legal documents we had prepared together. I sat quietly by the water and waited. The wind coming off the lake felt cold against my hands. A few hours later, my phone finally started vibrating. Nicole. I let it ring once, then again. The third time, I answered. Mom. She cried immediately, panic breaking through her voice. Where are you? Margaret brought me that letter. She said you disappeared. What is happening? I looked out across the lake before answering. Did you read it? Yes, of course I read it. Are you seriously doing this to us? I'm exactly where I need to be, I replied calmly. Far away from the life you told me you didn't want me in anymore. No, Mom. That's not what I meant. There it was. The retreat. The sudden attempt to soften cruelty, once consequences appeared. You didn't mean it. I asked quietly. Because when you told me your greatest birthday wish was for me to die, you sounded very certain. Nicole exhaled shakily. I was overwhelmed. Brian lost his job again. The kids have been difficult lately. I took my stress out on you. You did, I said softly. Please come back. We need you. Interesting. Now she needed me. Now that she had read the paperwork. Now that she understood the financial support was gone. Do you need me? I asked calmly, or do you need everything I provided for you? Silence. Finally she whispered, I need you. But even then, her voice lacked conviction. Nicole, for over 40 years, I built my life around you. My money, my time, my future. And when I finally needed love instead of responsibility, you told me you'd rather I was dead. I'm sorry, Mom, I know. But some things don't disappear after an apology. For a moment I stared across the water and realized something painful. I felt lighter thousands of miles away from my daughter than I had living 20 minutes from her. Please tell me where you are, Nicole begged. The kids keep asking about you. It was strange how my absence suddenly mattered now that I was no longer available every hour of the day. For years, everyone simply expected me to show up. The babysitting, the gifts, the emergencies, the constant rescuing. It had all become invisible because I never stopped doing it. The children will be okay, I said gently. What they'll learn is that words have consequences. But what if something happens to you? She asked desperately. What if you get sick? I almost laughed at the sudden concern. Nicole, I was hospitalized 3 separate times in the last 5 years because of my blood pressure. Silence. Do you know how many times you visited me? Nothing. None. I kept my voice steady. The first time, you skipped visiting because of a salon appointment. The second time was Brian's birthday dinner. The third time, you never even answered the phone. I didn't think it was serious, she whispered weakly. Exactly, I replied. Because my health was never important to you. My usefulness was. That's not fair, she snapped suddenly. This isn't about money. No. I asked quietly. Then why did your messages become urgent after the bank accounts changed? She started crying harder. I miss you, Mom. I closed my eyes briefly. Do you miss me? I asked softly. Or do you miss having someone available to solve every problem in your life? Then I ended the call. The phone immediately started ringing again. This time, I turned it off completely. That night, I had dinner alone at an elegant restaurant overlooking the water. I ordered salmon, caviar, and a bottle of French wine. The dinner cost nearly $220. Years ago, I would have felt guilty spending that kind of money on myself. That night, I didn't eat. The next morning, I turned my phone back on and found dozens of missed calls and messages from Nicole and Brian. The first messages sounded emotional. Please answer. We worried. But the later ones sounded very different. The bank contacted us. You closed the emergency account. The mortgage lawyer called. You can seriously do this to us? It was remarkable how quickly concern turned into panic once money became involved. Finally, I replied with a single message. I'm safe. I'm exactly where I want to be. Please stop looking for me. Nicole answered almost immediately. You're going to ruin us? There it was. The truth underneath everything else. Honestly, that was the moment I realized. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing everything I provided. Tell me honestly, after hearing something like that from your own child, would you forgive them eventually, or would that break your trust forever? And unfortunately, things only escalated from there. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing my final reply. Now you finally understand what my presence in your life was worth. Unfortunately, you realized it too late. That afternoon, I met with Edward Langford, the financial advisor Northbridge had arranged for me in Edinburgh. Edward reviewed my pension, savings, and remaining assets carefully before offering a reassuring smile. With your financial position, he explained, you can live very comfortably here for the rest of your life. For the first time in years, I discussed money without mentally saving part of it for Nicole's next crisis. And somehow, the realization felt freeing. Edward Langford continued reviewing my financial options carefully. With the right investments, he explained, your assets could grow significantly over the next several years. Scotland offers very stable long-term opportunities for retirees. I sat there quietly for a moment, thinking about how many times I could have secured my own future more comfortably, instead of constantly rescuing Nicole from one financial crisis after another. Before our meeting ended, Edward added something unexpected. You'd be surprised how many people relocate here after difficult family situations, he said gently. You are far from the only parent trying to rebuild a life after years of emotional exhaustion. For some reason, hearing that comforted me deeply. I wasn't uniquely foolish. I wasn't the only mother who had spent too many years confusing sacrifice with love. By Friday morning, I joined a hiking group for retirees exploring small towns outside Edinburgh. There were 12 of us all together, most between 60 and 75, all carrying different versions of the same quiet loneliness. People rarely talk about openly. During the bus ride, I ended up sitting beside a 71-year-old German woman named Helena Bauer. So what brought you to Scotland? She asked while we watched the countryside pass outside the windows. I surprised myself by answering honestly. My daughter told me her greatest birthday wish was for me to die. Helena turned toward me immediately. Seriously, completely seriously, I replied. After decades of helping her financially and helping raise her children, she decided my existence had become inconvenient. My God, Helena murmured softly. And what did you do? I looked out at the rolling hills outside the bus window. I left. Helena smiled slowly. That takes courage. As we spent the afternoon together, Helena shared pieces of her own story too. Her adult son and daughter-in-law had treated her like a walking bank account for years. Vacations, car payments, endless favors. The moment she started setting boundaries, they accused her of being selfish and threatened to keep the grandchildren away from her. The guilt nearly destroyed me at first, Helena admitted while we walked through a small, historic village later that afternoon. I kept thinking good mothers were supposed to sacrifice forever. What changed? I asked. She gave a sad little smile. I realized my children never once asked whether I was happy. They only cared whether I was still useful. Her words stayed with me long after we returned to Edinburgh. That night, back at my apartment, I finally turned my phone on again after days of silence. 62 missed calls. Dozens of messages. Most from Nicole and Brian. I read them one by one, watching the emotional progression unfold almost exactly as I expected. The early messages sounded emotional. Please come home. The kids miss you. But gradually the focus shifted. The bank scheduled a meeting. The mortgage situation is getting serious. You can really take the house over a misunderstanding. By the later messages, Nicole sounded angry. You're ruining our lives over one argument. Stop acting like a child, and come home. And finally, desperation. I've called hospitals, your friends, everyone. Please just tell me you're alive. What struck me most was what the messages never contained. Not once did Nicole truly acknowledge the cruelty of wishing for my death. Everything centered around the consequences my absence created for her life. Eventually, I sent one final response. I am safe. I'm happier than I've been in years. What you're experiencing now are the consequences of your own actions. I hope one day you learn to value people before losing them. Nicole replied almost immediately. Please, Mom. We can fix this. I promise I'll never say anything like that again. Just come back. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing my final reply. Apologies made out of panicked until broken trust. The words you said revealed how you truly saw me, Nicole. Desperation can't erase that. Then I blocked her number, Brian's too, and every unknown number connected to them. For the first time in decades, the silence in my life belonged entirely to me. The following Monday, I met Edward Langford again to finalize the paperwork for permanent residency in Scotland. We also began transferring my pension accounts and preparing the sale of my apartment back home. Are you certain you want to make this permanent? Edward asked carefully. I signed the final document with a steady hand. I've never been more certain of anything. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based on my own happiness instead of someone else's demands. Later that afternoon, Margaret Ellis called me from home, sounding almost breathless with excitement. Gloria, she said, Nicole came to my apartment yesterday crying. I leaned back in my chair quietly. What did she say? She kept calling everything a misunderstanding, begging me to convince you to come back. And what did you tell her? Margaret didn't hesitate. I told her the truth. That what she said to you was unforgivable. I closed my eyes briefly. Did she mention the financial problems? Margaret gave a dry little laugh. Oh, absolutely. The mortgage. School expenses. Brian still can't find stable work. She suddenly realizes how much you were carrying for them. Exactly as I expected. Nicole didn't miss me as a person. She missed the stability my sacrifices created. Margaret, I said quietly, if Nicole asks about me again, tell the woman who spent her life sacrificing everything for her daughter is gone. There was a long pause before Margaret answered softly. You know what, Gloria? I think that's the healthiest thing that could have happened to you. 3 weeks after arriving in Scotland, my life barely resembled the one I had left behind. I enrolled in Scottish culture and language classes 3 days a week. I joined a watercolor painting group, a Sunday book club. For the first time in decades, my calendar was filled with things I had chosen for myself instead of obligations placed on me by someone else. But the biggest surprise was financial. Without Nicole's constant emergencies, my savings had actually started growing again. The investments Edward helped me establish were already performing well. And, for the first time in years, I could plan my future around my own needs instead of Nicole's endless crises. Then one Thursday morning, while having breakfast at my favorite cafe near the water, my phone rang from an unfamiliar international number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But curiosity got the better of me. Mrs. Patterson. The woman's voice carried a calm American accent. My name is Monica Reed. I'm a social worker with Senior Welfare Services back home. I am calling Because your daughter filed a welfare complaint regarding your mental condition and safety. My stomach tightened instantly. A welfare complaint. There was a brief pause on the line. Yes, Monica continued carefully. Nicole claims you may be suffering from cognitive decline, and that your recent financial decisions suggest possible dementia. She also reported concerns about you suddenly relocating overseas alone. For a moment, I honestly couldn't speak. Nicole had simply tried to guilt me into coming home. She was now trying to portray me as mentally unstable, because she could no longer control my decisions. Ms. Reed, I said firmly, I am not suffering from dementia or cognitive impairment. I relocated to Scotland voluntarily. I'm healthy, financially stable, and fully capable of managing my own life. I understand, she replied professionally. However, because a formal complaint was filed, we are required to verify your well-being. Would you be willing to complete a medical and psychological evaluation through the U.S. Consular office in Edinburgh? Absolutely. I didn't hesitate for even a second. I'm happy to complete any evaluation necessary. After we arranged the details, I ended the call feeling physically sick. Nicole had crossed a line I never imagined possible. First she wished me gone. Now she was trying to destroy my credibility, because she couldn't regain control over my money and legal decisions. I immediately called Richard Calloway. Gloria, he said the moment he answered. I've been expecting your call. You already know. Richard sighed heavily. Nicole has been very busy. I told him about the complaint. That's not even the worst part, he admitted. She hired another attorney to challenge every legal change you made before leaving. She's claiming you weren't mentally competent when you signed the documents. I closed my eyes slowly. Can she actually do anything? She can try, Richard replied calmly. But legally, she has very little to stand on. Everything was documented carefully. Your decisions were organized, deliberate, and financially rational. Frankly, your move to Scotland alone completely contradicts the idea that you were incapable of functioning independently. What else has she done? She attempted to access your accounts under the excuse of concern for your welfare. She also tried delaying the mortgage proceedings, but because the paperwork is legally solid, there isn't much she can do. It was unbelievable how far Nicole was willing to go now that the financial support was gone. Richard, I said quietly, I want to pursue legal action for defamation. A brief silence followed. Honestly, he replied, after what she has done, I think that's more than justified. 2 days later, I arrived at the U.S. Consular office in Edinburgh for the evaluations. The examining physician, Dr. Samuel Green, was calm, experienced, and far kinder than I expected. After nearly 3 hours of evaluations and interviews, he finally leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Patterson, he said gently, you are fully competent and in excellent cognitive health. I felt my shoulders loosen for the first time all week. In fact, he continued, your planning and decision-making demonstrate remarkable clarity and independence. He paused briefly before adding something that stayed with me. To be candid, this appears less like concern for your safety and more like an attempt to regain financial control over you. And that will be documented officially? I asked. Yes, he replied. My report will clearly state that the allegations are unfounded. That same afternoon, Monica Reed called again. We've reviewed the medical findings, she explained. The complaint will be formally closed. The report confirms you are healthy, independent, and fully capable of managing your own affairs. Thank you, I said quietly. There will also be documentation showing the complaint was unsubstantiated, she added carefully. Repeated false reports could carry legal consequences. Perfect. Nicole hadn't only failed. Now there was an official record confirming her accusations were false. That night, Sitting alone in my apartment, overlooking the city lights, I finally decided to write something I had been avoiding for weeks. Not for Nicole. For women like me. Women who spent decades confusing self-destruction with motherhood. For 4 straight hours, I wrote about everything. The sacrifices, the manipulation, the exhaustion of spending your life trying to earn love through endless giving, and the terrifying relief that comes when you finally stop. By the end, I had written nearly 20 pages. I titled it, "When a Mother's Love Becomes Self-Destruction: How I Reclaimed My Life at 69. A few days later, I submitted the piece to an online publication focused on older women rebuilding their lives after difficult family relationships. I expected nothing from it. Instead, the response exploded. Hundreds of comments arrived from women describing nearly identical experiences. Adult children who treated them like personal banks. Mothers sacrificing retirement savings while being emotionally neglected. Grandparents valued only when free childcare was needed. One woman wrote, "My son only calls when he needs money." Another admitted, "I thought I was the only mother who felt emotionally used by her own children." For the first time, I realized how many women quietly lived inside these same painful patterns. A week later, the editor contacted me again asking if I would participate in a video interview discussing my story publicly. I agreed. If my experience could help even one woman recognize emotional exploitation sooner than I had, then maybe some part of the pain would still mean something. The interview was published 2 weeks later. Within days, it spread far beyond anything I expected. Thousands of comments, messages from women all over the country, stories of guilt, obligation, manipulation, exhaustion. But the message that affected me most arrived quietly one evening in my inbox. Brian Keller, my former son-in-law. I stared at his name for a long moment before opening the email. "Gloria, I watched your interview. I need you to know that I agree with everything you said. What Nicole said to you was unforgivable. And honestly, I've watched her take advantage of your generosity for years. I should have said something sooner, but the truth is we became dependent on your help." I kept reading slowly. "The kids miss you constantly. Nicole tells them you were sick and unable to travel. But one day they deserve to understand what really happened." The final lines hit me hardest. "I know apologies don't erase damage, but I wanted you to hear at least once from someone in this family that you deserved better than the way we treated you. I hope your new life is bringing you peace." I read the email 3 separate times before finally beginning my reply. Brian's email didn't change my decision to stay away from my family, but it gave me something I hadn't realized I still needed: validation. For the first time, someone inside that family openly admitted the way I had been treated was wrong, and somehow, that mattered. My new life in Scotland continued growing into something I never imagined possible. I had real friendships now. People who valued me for who I was instead of what I could provide. I had hobbies again, routine, peace, and most importantly, I had dignity. 6 months after arriving in Edinburgh, my life looked completely different from the one I left behind. Then one spring morning, Margaret Ellis called me sounding unusually excited. "Gloria," she said, "Nicole lost the house." For a moment, my heart tightened despite everything. Not for Nicole, for Ethan and Lily. "What happened?" I asked quietly. "The bank finalized the foreclosure last week," Margaret explained. "Brian couldn't find stable work for months. They fell too far behind on the payments, and once the legal protections expired, the bank moved forward." I closed my eyes slowly. "And the children? They okay," Margaret assured me. "They moved into a smaller apartment across town. Brian finally found factory work. Nicole had to go back to work too." The emotions that followed surprised me. I didn't feel happiness over their struggles, But I did feel something else. Relief. For the first time in their adult lives, Nicole and Brian were finally experiencing consequences without someone rescuing them. There's more, Margaret added carefully. Nicole asked if I knew how to contact you. She says she finally understands what she lost. And what did you tell her? I told her some damage can simply be erased with apologies. And honestly, Gloria, I told her you finally seem happy. Margaret was right. Over those months, I had built a peace inside myself that I didn't want to risk losing again. That afternoon, Richard Calloway called with more news. The foreclosure process is complete, he explained. Because of your co-signer protections, accumulated equity recovery, and the settlement distribution tied to the property, you are legally entitled to recover approximately $610,000. I sat there speechless for a moment. Money I had once believed was gone forever was now returning to me. There's something else, Richard continued. Your apartment back home also finalized this week. After fees and closing costs, the net proceeds are roughly $340,000. Between the recovered funds, my existing savings, and the investments Edward Langford had helped establish in Scotland, my financial position had transformed completely. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't surviving financially. I was secure. That night, I returned to my favorite restaurant, overlooking the water, and ordered champagne, simply because I wanted to celebrate myself. Not motherhood, not sacrifice, not survival, myself. As I sat there watching the city lights reflect across the water, I thought about how differently my life had turned out from the woman crying alone in that tiny apartment months earlier. Back then, I believed my life was ending. In reality, it had finally begun. The following morning, I committed to an idea that had been quietly growing in my mind for months. I decided to write a book, not just about my story, but about the emotional exploitation so many older women quietly endure from their own families. Through a local publishing contact, I was introduced to Sophia Laurent, an editor who specialized in memoirs and personal growth books. After hearing my story, she leaned forward immediately. Gloria, she said, women need this book. Over the next several months, I wrote constantly. The guilt, the manipulation, the endless pressure to sacrifice yourself in order to feel loved. The way mothers slowly disappear while trying to remain endlessly available to adult children. I titled the book, When Love Hurts, Reclaiming Your Life After Family Emotional Abuse. 8 months after publication, the book unexpectedly became a bestseller across several countries. The letters I received afterward changed me forever. Women from all over the world wrote to tell me they finally recognized themselves in my story. One woman admitted she had spent decades financially supporting her unemployed adult son out of guilt. Another wrote that she finally sold the oversized family home she could no longer afford because she realized she didn't need to keep sacrificing herself for children who barely visited. But one letter affected me more than all the others. It came from a 30-year-old woman named Claire Donovan. Mrs. Patterson, after reading your book, I realized my siblings and I have treated our mother exactly the way Nicole treated you. Yesterday, I apologized to her for years of taking her sacrifices for granted. For the first time, I asked her what she wanted for her own life, instead of expecting her to keep living for ours. Thank you for helping me understand this before it was too late. I cried after reading that letter. Not because of pain, because for the first time, it felt like my suffering had helped someone else avoid making the same mistake. 2 years after arriving in Scotland, another letter arrived unexpectedly in my mailbox. This one was handwritten. When I saw the names at the bottom, my heart nearly stopped. Ethan and Lily, now 12 years old. Dear Grandma Gloria, Dad finally told us the truth about why you left. He said, Mom said, very hurtful things to you, and that's why you decided to start a new life somewhere peaceful. We miss you very much. We also want you to know we understand why you left. We're proud of you for being brave. When we're older, we hope maybe we can come visit you in Scotland someday, if you still want to see us. We love you. The letter included small drawings of me, standing beside green hills and old stone buildings. I sat there crying quietly for almost an hour after reading it, not because I regretted leaving, but because the letter reminded me that protecting my dignity had never erased my love for the people I left behind. It had simply taught me something I should have learned years earlier. Love without respect eventually destroys the person giving it. That night, sitting beside the window, overlooking the Edinburgh skyline, I began writing my reply to my grandchildren. The silk scarf I had bought during my first week in Scotland rested quietly across the chair beside me. My dearest Ethan and Lily, your letter was one of the most beautiful gifts I have received in years. I love you deeply, and I always will, no matter how much distance exists between us. When you are older and able to make your own choices, the doors to my heart and my home will always remain open to you. Until then, I want you to remember something important. Words matter. They can heal people or break them apart forever. And real love cannot survive without mutual respect. I love you with all my heart. 3 years after the birthday that changed my life forever, I now sit on the balcony of my apartment in Edinburgh watching the distant hills. While writing the final lines of this story, I am 75 years old. My financial future is secure, with assets worth well over $4 million, and a life that finally belongs to me. My book reached readers all over the world, and after everything that happened, I found a level of peace I once believed I would never feel again. Nicole asked me to disappear from her life as a birthday gift. In the end, I gave her exactly what she wanted. What she never understood was that losing me meant losing far more than a mother's unconditional love. She also lost the person who had quietly carried her emotional and financial stability for decades. My disappearance became the consequence of her choices, but my new life became the reward for finally choosing myself. And despite every painful moment that led me here, I would still make the same decision again. Because sometimes saving yourself means walking away before you disappear completely. For me, that choice changed everything. Some people spend their entire lives trying to earn love that should have been given freely. So tell me, do you believe family should always be forgiven? Or are there words that permanently destroy trust? If this story meant something to you, feel free to like, share, and subscribe for more life stories like this. And wherever you are tonight, I truly hope you are surrounded by people who make you feel wanted, not merely useful. Thank you for sitting with me through my story.